we're going to be talking about how to create frequency distributions in Excel from raw data. All right, so we're just going to overview one sample data set in Excel already. You could download it from one of the links below. Then we're going to talk about how to create frequency distributions from that data. But in order to create these distributions, visualizable, seeable distributions, we need to go first from the data to frequency tables. Then from the tables, we'll go then to the visualizations. All right, so first, going from raw data to frequency tables. Well, the reason we want to do this is oftentimes when we look at raw data, it's really hard to make sense of. It's just rows and rows and rows of data. And it'd be really nice if somebody could summarize that data for us so that we could visualize it. When we summarize and visualize that data, we get a sense of what the data looks like. And we're going to be talking later about actual shapes of distributions. So there's two ways to go and do frequency tables in Excel. One is by using formulas. Here we're going to be using the formula COUNTIF. The other way is to use pivot tables. And so I'm going to show you one example of using pivot tables, but we're going to be using mostly the formulas. So if you want to open up your Excel file that has all of our data in it, this is a sample data set of, let's say, 100 friends from Facebook. Notice that they all have this CID, which is their case ID, and each column shows some sort of characteristic or variable. And each cell for each person has a value for that variable. So let's look at example 1, CID number 1, case number 1. For this person, they have 4 tagged photos. Not a lot of tagged photos. They seem to have 0 mobile uploads. Again, not a lot of mobile uploads. Maybe they don't have a smartphone, right? So if we go down the line, we could see that there are lots and lots and lots of variables here. So there's tagged photos, mobile photos, uploaded photos, profile pictures, their number of friends, number of siblings, relationship status, right? So there's a whole bunch of these. But here's one that we're going to be focusing on today, birth month. Birth month is going to be important for us today. Also, we're going to be looking at age and height. Now, if I asked you, oh, see these 100 people? I'll show them to you sort of all at once so you could see them. Oh, okay, not all at once, but here's these 100 people. What can you tell me about their age? What can you tell me about their height? It'd be really hard to do because it's just lines and lines and lines of data. It'd be nice if there was one way where we could just sort of easily see all the data at once in a way where it was a little more tangible to us. And that's why we're going to be talking about how to visualize these and how to create frequency tables. So in the files that I've provided for you, I've put in little tabs already. One of the sheets has all of our data in it. One of the sheets talks about the variables. So here we have a whole bunch of different variable names, like the case ID number, the tagged photos, how many photos they're tagged in, mobile uploads, how many mobile photos uploaded, relationship status, right? Relationship status, birth month, birth year, gender. So these are a whole bunch of different variables that are already in this data set. I also have a column that tells you what kind of measure it is. So is it a nominal measure where it's just it's a number, but it really stands for a name? A relationship status is one of those, where there's a number there, like 1, 2, 3, or 4, but it doesn't mean that the relationship status is literally like the number 1. It actually means, if you scroll over, if they have a 0, it means that their relationship status is blank. If they have a 1, it means that they're single. If they have a 2, it means they're in a relationship. If it's a 3, they're engaged. If it's a 4, they're married. And if it's a 5, it's complicated. 6, if it's other, right? So that's an example of what we call a nominal type of measure. And just so you could see all of these things at the same time, if you look down here, there's this little, it looks like two little blue rectangles. If you drag that over, then you could sort of keep this column just static and locked while you move these columns. All right? All right. So we could also see that birth month is what we call, it's sort of interval. It could also be seen as ordinal. It's not quite interval because it's technically like 30 or 31 days, so it's not exactly the same interval, but you could sometimes call it interval. And each of the numbers represent one of the months. Birth year is also interval. There's an interval of exactly 1 year. Gender is obviously nominal because even though there's a 1 or a 2, it doesn't mean that their gender is 1 or 2. It means that if they have a 1, they're a male. If they have a 2, they're a female. Something like friends is really easy to understand, though, because friends is a ratio measure. It's a count of how many friends they have. So that's continuous, a continuous type of variable. And if they have a 0, it means they have no friends, right? That's very rare on Facebook, but hey, it could happen. All right, so I'm going to move this locked piece over. All right, the next tab you could see there says birth month on it. And so far, I've created a little setup so that we could begin our frequency table. A frequency table is just a count of how many people are born in January, how many people are born in February, and so on and so forth, right? Now, if we had to do that by hand, it would be really hard. We'd have to go to our data. If you click on data, go to birth month, and we'd have to count up how many people have ones. 1, 2, right? But this is a very error-prone process. So we're going to use Excel to help us do that really efficiently. So first, let's go to our first example. So we have here a data set with data from 100 Facebook friends. Are more of these friends born in a particular month? Or is the number of births fairly uniform across the year? Well, is there a reason to believe that one month is more popular for having babies than another month? We're not sure. But it's really hard to see the answer to this question, literally like see the answer to this question, by looking at the data. Because the data just look like this giant list. That's why we're going to create frequency tables. Now, in order to create frequency tables, we could start off with a formula. In order to do a formula, remember, we always start off with the equal sign to tell Excel, hey, I'm doing a formula here. In order to count how many ones we have, we could use the count formula. It's a formula that's already pre-written in Excel, so Excel will just do it for us. Now, if we just stopped at the word count, it would just count how many things you have, period. It wouldn't count how many ones you have, right? So we want to use the formula COUNTIF. That's the function that we want to use. Now, what's handy about Excel is that once you type in something, then it'll tell you what inputs you need. Here it says you need the range, so the range of cells that you want Excel to look at, as well as the criteria. So here I'm going to tell Excel, well, look over at my data. So I'm going to click on data and click from this one all the way down to the very, very last row, right? And then if I go back to birth month, then it should say from row I2 all the way to I101. Oh, but it has it twice. So I'm going to delete this part. All right. So that's the data that I wanted to look at. This little colon right here is telling you the range. It says go from I2 all the way to I101. Now, what's the criteria I want? And before I put my criteria, Excel tells me, it reminds me, oh, I need a little comma in between. So I'm going to put in a comma. Now, what's my criteria? Well, I wanted to count it if it's a 1. So I'm going to say if it equals to whatever is in this cell. Now, Excel will automatically put in that this is part of the birth month sheet. But it actually doesn't need this one either. But it'll put it in automatically for you. So I'm going to delete that one just so you could see. But you could have it there as well. Doesn't matter. So let me finish my little function, and let's look at what it says. It says, count if the data in this range is basically equal to whatever is in A2, this one. Let me hit enter, and it should say 7. So 7 people out of my 100 Facebook friends are born in the month of January. Now, the great thing about Excel is that it's a relative program. If I copy and paste this cell, one cell down, it'll take everything in my formula and sort of calibrate it one cell down, right? But let me look at this. Do I want it to bring everything one row down? That means my data would go from I3 to I102. That's not what I want. I want the data part to stay the same, but I want this part to move and move down so that then it'll say, oh, count if this data is equal to 2, right? So here's what I'm going to do. To tell Excel, keep this part the same, I'm going to put in a $sign right in front of the I and right in front of the 2. This says freeze the row, freeze the column. And so I'm going to put that also in front of this one as well as that one. That means this data set will never move, but this A2 will move, okay? So notice that doing that doesn't change anything for my first row, but I'm going to take this and copy it. I'm just hitting either Command-C if you're on a Mac or Control-C if you're on a PC, and then pasting it one cell underneath. All right, so let's double-click on this to see what it says. So it says count if data, and my data stayed exactly the same from I2 to I101. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. But notice that now my criteria has changed. My criteria has moved one row down because I've copied and pasted my formula one row down. Excel, it's relative, so it'll move everything one row down. So let's try it with the next one. I'm just copying and pasting this one row down. And let's double click on it to see what it says. It says count if data stays exactly the same from row 2 to 101, but now it's comparing it to whatever's in A4, which is March. All right. So the nice thing about Excel is that if you look right in the corner here, there's this little box in the lower right-hand corner. If you put your mouse over that, it'll turn into a little cross. And then if I drag that all the way down, it'll copy and paste my formula again and again all the way down. And we could just spot check one of these down here. Once again, my data set has stayed the same because I put those $signs in there. But my criteria has moved down to A10 now. So great. I have my frequency table now. Frequency tables are nice because they just give you the raw numbers. In the month of January, there's 7 people who have birthdays then. In the month of July, there's 10 people who have birthdays then. And then we could look at our data. Now, we could stop here. But I want to show you another way that we could create frequency tables. So I'm going to go back to my data and show you a second way. The second way is less common, but I still want to show it to you because we may use it once in a while. We're going to use what's called pivot tables. So what I'm going to do is just put my cursor anywhere, and up in my Excel toolbar, unfortunately you can't see it on the screen, up in my Excel toolbar, there's a little tab called Data. Seldom used. But if you scroll down, there should be something that says Pivot Table or Pivot Table Report. So go ahead and click on that. Once that comes up, you should have a little pivot table wizard that pops up. And you'll say, where's this data that you want to analyze? Well, it's in my Microsoft Excel database. And is this the data you want to use? Yes, I want from A all the way to M, and from A1 all the way to 101. So let's hit next. And I want to put my pivot table on a new sheet, just so that I could show you. And then I'm just going to hit finish. And a new sheet should pop up. It should probably be called sheet 1. Just going to make this a little bigger for you. A little pivot table should pop up. You should also have a little pivot table toolbar that also pops up. Let me drag it in for you. Here we go. So this is a little pivot table toolbar that comes up. Now this pivot table toolbar has all of my variables in it, and I could drag these variables into this pivot table down here. I'm not actually sure why it's called a pivot table. I assume it's because you could move these variables from one corner to another, and that's sort of like a pivot. I don't know. All right. So what we want is a bunch of months on this side, and then I want it to tell me how many people are born in that month. So I'm going to look for birth month and put it in my row fields, because each row is going to be a birth month. And then I'm going to take that birth month and drag it into my data as well. Now what it does is, right now it sums up how many of those birth months there are. So for January it gets it right because it sums up 1 7 times. But for 2, I don't want it to sum up. So instead I'm going to tell my pivot table, count how many there are, don't sum them up. So I go to pivot table and I go to field settings. And I hit count instead of sum. And I hit OK. And when that happens, you could see we basically get the same numbers that we had when we used the formula. In the month of January, we have 7. In the month of July, we have 10. Right? So this is another way that you could look for frequency tables. Now notice that this was pretty fast, right? Pivot tables do require a little bit of work on the front end. So there is a little bit of a learning curve, but once you do understand them, they're really handy. So we may be using them again in the future. But if you don't feel comfortable with them, feel free to also use the formulas. I'll be using the formulas for the rest of this lesson. So let's go back to my birth month. My birth month pivot table created just through Excel formulas by themselves. Now, I have this nice pivot table, nice frequency table, but it'd be nice if I could visualize it, right? Here I have to still read each row. And although for 12 months it's not so bad, there might be times when this is less helpful to us.